The house was too quiet now. It had been nearly a year since Mr. Callahan's wife, Margaret, passed away. And though the clock still ticked, the kettle still whistled, and the birds still chirped at the windows each morning, none of it felt the same. The old man had lived in that modest, ivy-clad house for over 4 decades. First as a young husband, then as a father, and now as a widower. The change had settled into the walls like dust. Each night, after tidying the kitchen and washing exactly 1 dish, 1 fork, and 1 cup, Mr. Callahan would shuffle into the small sitting room. There, nestled in the corner near the fireplace, sat Margaret's chair, faded blue with flowered embroidery on the arms, and a matching footrest worn smooth from years of use. And every night, curled up on that chair, Luna would wait. Luna was no kitten anymore. She was a weathered calico with 1 torn ear and slow, deliberate movements. She had been Margaret's cat, or rather, Margaret had been hers. Ever since the funeral, Luna had claimed that chair, as if to keep the seat warm for a ghost. Mr. Callahan found it oddly comforting. Each evening, before bed, he would take out a pen and his frayed leather notebook and write his wife a letter. They were never long, a paragraph, maybe 2, just the highlights of his day. The odd neighbor who waved twice instead of once. The soup he burned. A flower she once liked, now blooming again. When he finished, he would tear out the page, fold it neatly, and set it gently on the arm of Margaret's chair beside Luna. "I'll tell her you said hello," he'd whisper, and the cat would blink slowly, as if she understood. From the window across the yard, another pair of eyes watched this ritual night after night. Sophie was 10 years old and lived in the yellow house next door. Her parents worked long hours, and her older brothers paid her little mind. Her favorite pastime had become watching the strange old man and his cat through the window when the curtains weren't drawn. She didn't think he was creepy, just sad, gentle even. She'd seen him put out food for the birds, gently lift a beetle from his porch rather than squish it, and once kneel painfully to fix a crooked fence post in her yard when no one else had noticed it was broken. But the part that fascinated her most was the cat, and the letters. First, she thought they were just notes. Then, one day, on a whim, she borrowed her mom's old binoculars from the closet and looked closer. Through the slightly warped window glass and her shaky hands, she caught the words, "My dearest Margaret," written in careful cursive. Her breath caught. From that night on, she watched more closely. Sometimes the letters were long, sometimes barely a few lines, but always tender. It tugged at something deep in her chest. A mix of curiosity, sorrow, and admiration. She couldn't explain it. And then something strange began to happen. One evening, when Mr. Callahan came back to collect the letter, as he always did before throwing it away or tucking it into a tin, it was gone. He looked confused, even checked the floor, but eventually chalked it up to having misplaced it. But Sophie knew. It had fluttered off the chair in a gust of wind, landed halfway under the porch rail, and lay there unnoticed, until Sophie slipped quietly across the yard and retrieved it. She hadn't meant to pry. She had just wanted to keep it, to hold something that raw and lovely and sad. She read it once, then again. It made her throat tighten. Her mind buzzed. That night, Sophie didn't sleep. Instead, she crept downstairs, pulled out a blank sheet of paper, and using her neatest script, she began writing. It started slowly, awkwardly, but then she found her voice, or rather Margaret's. It wasn't meant to be cruel. She only wanted to give him peace, hope, maybe just a reason to smile again. And so she signed it, "Forever yours, Margaret." Mr. Callahan's days were quiet, and predictably so. He rose at 6 each morning, the same way he had when Margaret was alive. Though there was no one else to cook for now, he still made a full breakfast. Eggs, toast, and tea, 1 cup only, with a splash of milk. The other cup, Margaret's favorite blue one, remained on the counter, untouched but never put away. After breakfast, he would read the newspaper front to back, circle a crossword or two, then tend to the small garden she had once adored. He hadn't planted anything new since she passed, but he still trimmed the hedges, watered the tulips, and plucked weeds with careful hands. The backyard birds, sparrows mostly, had become familiar companions. Sometimes he spoke to them, mostly about Margaret. But the most sacred part of his day began at dusk. As the sunlight faded into a soft orange glow, Mr. Callahan would settle into his worn recliner and glance toward the fireplace. Luna, as expected, would already be curled on Margaret's chair, her eyes half closed, tail neatly tucked. It had become their silent agreement. She waited, and he wrote. He'd reach for his notebook, now softened by use, and uncap his pen. The words came slowly, always deliberate. My dearest Margaret, today I found one of your old scarves in the coat closet. It still smelled faintly of lavender. I held it for longer than I should have, I suppose. Other times the letters were more mundane. The tulips are blooming. You'd be pleased. Luna still won't touch the tuna I bought on sale. Picky girl. He folded each page carefully and placed it beside Luna, who would blink once in acknowledgement, never meowing, never moving. It was as though she, too, knew the importance of these quiet offerings. From her window next door, Sophie watched the routine unfold night after night. She didn't tell her parents. She didn't even tell her friends at school. It felt like a secret, one not meant to be broken. Sometimes, Luna would turn her head and stare straight at Sophie's window. The girl liked to think the cat knew she was there watching and didn't mind, maybe even approved. As the spring evenings grew windier, Sophie sat with her chin on the windowsill, her gaze flicking between the glowing light in Mr. Callahan's sitting room and the silhouette of the old man hunched in his chair. Then, one night, everything changed. It had been a blustery Thursday, and the air still smelled of rain. Sophie sat by her window, a blanket around her shoulders, watching the scene unfold again. Pen to paper, paper to chair, Luna to stillness. But this time, Mr. Callahan had left the window cracked. A sharp gust blew through the room, sending the folded letter fluttering off the chair, past Luna's paws, and right out through the open window. It floated like a lost feather, twisting and tumbling, and landed in a bush along the fence between the two houses. Sophie blinked in disbelief. She stared wide-eyed as Mr. Callahan rose and glanced toward the chair, confused. He bent down to check the floor, even patted his lap as if expecting it to be stuck there. Finally, he frowned, gave Luna a weary nod, and turned off the light. Moments later, the room went dark. Sophie didn't hesitate. She threw on her sneakers, slipped out the back door, and crept through the cool, damp grass toward the bush. The letter was wedged between the branches, slightly bent but dry. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it. My dearest Margaret, do you remember the old record player we used to dance by? I found it today in the attic. The needle still works, believe it or not. I played our song just once. I danced a little too. Not well, but I think you'd still have smiled. Sophie's throat tightened. There was something sacred in the way he wrote, something too beautiful to ignore, and something inside her, a need to connect, to help, stirred awake. She gently refolded the letter and held it to her chest. This time, she wouldn't return it. This time, she would write back. Sophie couldn't sleep. The letter sat on her desk, carefully smoothed and refolded, but its words echoed through her mind like a lullaby she couldn't forget. She had never read anything like it. Not in books, not in stories, not even in the birthday cards her parents signed with love but little warmth. This letter was different. It wasn't just words. It was a conversation with someone who no longer answered. And somehow, it made Sophie feel both heartbroken and hopeful at once. She looked out her window again. Mr. Callahan's house was dark. Luna, barely visible, was curled on the same chair as always, her body a soft outline against the night. Sophie turned back to the letter and whispered, "He just wants to be heard." The next morning, a Saturday, Sophie woke earlier than usual. The letter still lay where she'd left it, and beside it, a fresh sheet of notebook paper. Her pencil hovered for a long while. She didn't know exactly what she was going to write or why, only that she had to. She began simply, "My dearest Thomas, yes, I remember the record player. You always had 2 left feet, but I danced with you anyway because your smile made every step worth it. I'm so glad you played our song. I hope you danced like no one was watching, because I always am." She paused, her heart beating too fast for a girl writing fiction. But something about it felt real. It wasn't a lie. Not really. It was kindness wrapped in ink. She continued, "Keep writing to me. I'm still listening. With love always, Margaret." Sophie read it 3 times. It was short but soft, comforting. She copied it in her neatest handwriting, folded it gently, and slipped it into a plain envelope. No name, no return address, just one word on the front. "For you." Her hands shook as she walked to Mr. Callahan's house, glancing over her shoulder every few seconds. The morning was still and quiet. No barking dogs, no passing cars. Just the sound of birds in the trees and the breeze nudging flower petals across the sidewalk. She reached the mailbox and slid the envelope inside. Then she ran back home, heart pounding. Mr. Callahan didn't check his mailbox until late afternoon. He hadn't planned to. The mail these days brought little more than bills and grocery ads. And besides, the ache in his knees made him avoid the porch stairs whenever possible. But Luna had meowed, once loud and clear, and stared at the door until he sighed and fetched his coat. He opened the creaking box expecting nothing, but paused when he saw the envelope. No stamps and markings, just, "For you." He turned it over in his hands. The paper was crisp, uncreased, delicate, carefully handled. Inside, the note was written in neat, slanted cursive, nothing like his own. The words hit him like a whisper from another world. "My dearest Thomas." His legs gave slightly, and he sat down right there on the porch steps. As he read, the corners of his eyes warmed. He let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in his chest for months. Couldn't be real, Margaret was gone. He knew that, but still, the letter felt like sunlight on a cold day. Not quite enough to believe in spring, but just enough to remember what warmth felt like. He looked around, half expecting someone to jump out and say it was a prank. But the street was empty. He looked toward the window where Luna often sat. She was there now, still and serene, watching him. "Did you do this, girl?" he asked softly, the corners of his lips twitching into something like a smile. "Is this your magic?" Luna blinked, slow and knowing. Mr. Callahan folded the letter carefully and held it to his heart. Something in him stirred. Not joy, not exactly, but a thread of something lighter than grief. Hope, maybe. Connection. The feeling that he wasn't as alone as he thought. He didn't know who had written it, but he knew one thing: he would write back. Luna had always been quiet, even when Margaret was alive. She never meowed for attention or darted across furniture like other cats. Instead, she observed, a calm, silent witness to the world around her. But lately, Mr. Callahan had noticed something different. Every morning, Luna lingered by the front door, her green eyes fixed on the mailbox. Sometimes she sat at the window for hours, tail curled neatly around her paws, ears alert to every sound. Once, she even pawed softly at the door, something she hadn't done in years. "Looking for another letter?" he asked one morning, easing into the chair beside her. He wasn't sure who the mysterious writer was, or how they knew the little details only he and Margaret had shared. Their Sunday afternoon walks, the worn yellow sweater he still wore. But every letter felt like a bomb, wrapping around the hollow ache in his chest. They always came when he needed them most, and somehow Luna always seemed to be watching when they arrived. Next door, Sophie noticed the change too. Luna had become a fixture in her day, a calming presence framed in the window like a living photograph. The cat seemed to know when Sophie had a letter ready. She'd appear by the garden stone near the Callahans' shared fence, settling there like a guardian. So Sophie adjusted her delivery method. Rather than risking the mailbox again, she started tucking the letters beneath the flat, mossy stone where Luna now spent her mornings. It became a secret routine, a quiet ritual between girl and cat. The next reply was simple, filled with Mr. Callahan's soft musings about a book Margaret had once loved. Sophie answered with a memory about reading it together, her words laced with warmth and tenderness. She signed it, as always, With love always, Margaret. And as always, Luna was the quiet messenger. Mr. Callahan no longer questioned how the letters arrived. At first, he had wondered, maybe a volunteer from the senior center, maybe one of the neighborhood kids playing a kind prank. But as the letters continued, the doubt gave way to something else. Comfort. He'd sit by Luna each evening, read the letter once, then again, letting the words fill the spaces Margaret had left behind. Sometimes he even read them aloud, and Luna would blink slowly, as if in understanding. "You're part of this, aren't you?" he murmured one night, stroking her aging fur. "Somehow, you know?" Luna didn't answer, of course, but she pressed her head gently into his palm. That night, he wrote back, "Dearest Margaret, your words find me when I need them most. I don't know how or why, but I don't care. I only know that when I see Luna by the garden, I feel like I'm not entirely alone. That maybe you're still close. I miss you, every day, but somehow you've made the silence less sharp. Yours always, Thomas." Across the fence, Sophie watched as Luna sat by the stone again the next day, tail flicking slightly. The old man emerged onto the porch slowly, holding a folded letter. He looked around, then down, spotting the stone and the page beneath. He knelt stiffly, plucked the note, and smiled. Sophie's heart swelled. She hadn't meant to do more than ease his sadness once or twice. But now, she felt like she was part of something delicate and meaningful, like stitching together two torn pieces of the same cloth. It was no longer just letters. It was a conversation, connection, and Luna was the thread that held it all together. As the weeks passed, the garden stone became their secret postbox. The letters grew longer, sometimes sharing dreams, sometimes sharing grief. Sophie learned more about Margaret than she ever expected. Her favorite songs, her dislike of rainy days, her habit of humming when she cooked. Through Mr. Callahan's words, Margaret came alive again. Not just to him, but to Sophie too. And every day, Luna sat quietly nearby, watching, waiting, bridging the distance between a lonely girl, a grieving man, and the invisible love that still lived between them. The change in Mr. Callahan was slow, but steady, like the return of spring after a bitter winter. He began rising earlier, humming softly as he made tea. He'd sit longer on the porch, sometimes with a crossword, sometimes just watching the street with Luna in his lap. Neighbors who once passed by unnoticed now received nods and the occasional good morning. Even the mailman seemed startled the first time Mr. Callahan greeted him with a warm thanks. Most evenings, he left out a small dish of treats for Luna, just in case she wandered outside during her twilight rounds. He spoke to her more now, not just out of habit, but with the faint joy of someone slowly relearning how to live. "Do you think she'll write again tonight?" he'd ask, rubbing behind Luna's ears. As if on cue, the cat would glance toward the garden stone. And she always did right back. Sophie, on the other side of the fence, had grown bolder. What started as simple lines of comfort now became full conversations. Her letters began including bits of advice. "Try adding honey to your tea again. You always liked it that way." Or, "Don't forget to rest your knees on cloudy days." She slipped in memories, invented ones, sometimes, about shared sunsets or silly misadventures with burnt casseroles and misplaced eyeglasses. But more than that, she started to include herself. Not directly, of course. She was still writing as Margaret, but pieces of Sophie's heart now lived in the words. Her hope, her fears, her longing for connection. Occasionally, her handwriting changed slightly. Some nights, she added little doodles. A clumsy flower, a crescent moon, a tiny fish for Luna. She didn't know if he noticed, but Mr. Callahan did. He held each letter gently, like a fragile photograph. He noticed the changes, the curl of a new letter G, the tilt of a drawing in the corner. He never questioned them. Instead, he marveled. "You're still growing, even now," he whispered one evening after reading a note that ended with, "Don't let the garden die. You always said it bloomed for both of us." That evening, he pulled on an old jacket and went out back, clearing the dead leaves around Margaret's roses. He hadn't touched them in months. "All right, old girl," he said to the flowers. "Let's see if you've still got some color left." His letters grew more vulnerable too. He began writing about things he had never said out loud. Not even to Margaret while she was alive. "I wish I hadn't waited so long to retire. I thought I had more time with you. Do you remember the trip we never took to Maine? I still have the brochure. Sometimes I still hear your voice in the house. I follow it, only to realize it's just the wind in the hallway." Sophie read each letter with reverence, sometimes holding them to her chest before folding them back up. She began to understand grief in a way she never had before. Not as something loud and dramatic, but as something that moved quietly, like a tide. And somehow, through her pretend notes, she was helping Mr. Callahan navigate it. But she also worried. He didn't know it was her. He didn't know it was a child, barely 14, scribbling with trembling hands by flashlight after bedtime. Would he be angry if he found out? Would he feel betrayed? Still, she couldn't stop, because every reply seemed to pull him further from the shadow he'd been living under. And Luna, sweet, silent Luna, was still acting as the quiet postmistress between them. One Thursday, Sophie included something new. She tucked in a pressed wildflower between the folds of her letter. On the back of the paper, just beneath the final line, she drew a tiny sun. When Mr. Callahan opened it, he smiled for a long time. Not just a polite smile, a full one, reaching his eyes. His hands trembled slightly as he touched the petals. He didn't speak. Instead, he turned to Luna beside him on the porch, eyes misty. "Thank you," he whispered. Luna purred softly and leaned into his leg. The paper trail stretched on, like a gentle path stitched between two aching hearts. And though neither of them said it aloud, both Mr. Callahan and Sophie were beginning to realize something or someone was healing. And Luna, ever watchful, remained at the center of it all. The evening had begun like any other. The sky blushed in soft shades of lavender and gold, and Luna was doing her usual rounds, sniffing flower beds, stretching atop the fence, and lingering by the mailbox as if expecting something. Mr. Callahan, now in the habit of sitting on the porch with a warm mug in hand, watched her with a contented sigh. He noticed her tail twitch and ears perk as she stepped closer to the garden stone, her new favorite spot. But what caught his eye next wasn't Luna. It was the girl, kneeling quietly beside the stone. Sophie gently placed a folded note beneath it. Her hand lingered on Luna's fur, stroking behind her ears with practiced care. She didn't see him watching. Her lips moved, whispering something only Luna could hear. Then, just as she turned to leave, a gust of wind scattered the topsoil, and with it, the letter. It tumbled, flapped, and skidded across the garden path, landing at Mr. Callahan's feet. He stared at it for a moment, not in shock, not in anger, but in something softer, a dawning understanding. Sophie froze. Her heart thudded against her ribs. For a moment, she considered running, but something about his gentle gaze, the way he bent down and picked up the letter with care, made her stay. He opened it slowly. Inside was her familiar handwriting, a short message written as Margaret, but with a sun doodled in the corner. Just like the last one, his eyes didn't widen. He didn't look betrayed. He simply smiled. "You're her," he said softly. "You're the one who's been writing back." Sophie took a hesitant step forward. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to lie. You sounded so sad, and your letters were so kind. I thought it might help." Mr. Callahan nodded slowly, folding the note with care and placing it beside him. "It did. More than you know." Sophie blinked. "You're not mad." "Mad?" He chuckled, the sound low and warm. "How could I be mad at the one person who's reminded me what it feels like to be heard again?" Luna trotted over and leapt into his lap, curling as if to confirm his words. He glanced at Sophie. "Would you join me for tea?" The kitchen smelled faintly of peppermint and something sweet, maybe lemon biscuits. Sophie sat at the small round table, legs swinging nervously beneath her chair. Mr. Callahan moved carefully, pouring tea into mismatched cups with quiet elegance. They sat across from each other, the silence broken only by the clink of spoons and the distant hum of cicadas. "She loved lemon biscuits," Mr. Callahan finally said, offering her one from a tin. "Margaret, I mean," Sophie took one politely. "She sounds amazing." She was stubborn as a mule, cleverer than anyone I knew, and had a laugh that could shame thunder. His smile faded into something wistful. "When she passed, I wasn't sure how to keep going. Then Luna started sleeping in her chair, and I began writing. I suppose it made me feel like she wasn't entirely gone." Sophie looked down at her teacup. "I never lost someone like that, but I know what it's like to feel alone." He met her gaze, kind and understanding. "And instead of looking away, you chose to reach out, with kindness, imagination, and the handwriting of a very convincing Margaret." Sophie blushed. "I just wanted to help. And you did." He sipped his tea. "Maybe you saved me in a way." Luna stretched out between them on the table, eyes half-lidded, purring as if to seal the moment. Her paw brushed against both their hands. "She was the real messenger," Sophie whispered, smiling. "I don't think I would have ever gotten brave enough without her. She always did have a gift for knowing who needed her." Mr. Callahan agreed, running a gentle hand along Luna's back. That night, as twilight deepened and stars began to pepper the sky, Mr. Callahan stood with Sophie on the porch. The old calico cat lay curled at their feet. "Would it be all right if I kept writing?" Sophie asked quietly. He nodded. "Only if you'll let me write back." Sophie grinned. And just like that, the letters continued, not as messages from the past, but as stories between new friends. Shared thoughts, jokes, favorite poems. The kind of connection neither of them realized they were missing. Through it all, Luna remained at the center, silent, steady, and ever watchful, as if she had known, from the very beginning, exactly what they both needed. The morning sun filtered gently through lace curtains, casting warm, familiar patterns across the wooden floor. Mr. Callahan sat at his kitchen table, a pen resting between his fingers, and Luna curled beside him in her usual place. Outside, the garden was in bloom, daffodils reaching upward as though drawn by something hopeful. For the first time in months, there was no ache in his chest, just a quiet fullness. The letters had become a ritual again, though different now. He no longer wrote as a man grasping for the past. He wrote as someone living in the present, laughing at Sophie's stories, replying with ones of his own. Tea on the porch had become a weekly tradition. Sometimes they'd read poetry. Other times they'd simply sit in silence, letting Luna's purring fill the space between them. But today's letter was different. It would be his last. He set his pen to paper with steady hands, the words already formed in his heart. "Dear Sophie, you may not have realized it, but you changed my life. When I first started writing letters, it was to hold on to someone I couldn't bear to let go. I was writing to a memory, to silence. But then, someone answered. Your words, full of warmth, courage, and light, reached further than you know. You reminded me that love doesn't disappear when a person is gone. It shifts. It finds new homes in new hearts. You've become family, Sophie, the granddaughter I never had. You gave me purpose again, a reason to open the windows, water the flowers, and smile when I hear the mailbox creak. Margaret would have adored you. She always said it's the quiet kindnesses that keep the world spinning. Thank you for spinning mine back into motion. This is the last letter I'll write. Not because the story ends, but because I no longer need the page to feel connected. You're right here now, and that's more than I ever dreamed. With all my heart, Mr. C." He folded the letter carefully and slid it into an envelope, his handwriting neat and deliberate. He tapped Luna's head softly. "All yours, girl." As if she understood, Luna stood, stretched and padded to the door, tail high. Mr. Callahan opened it for her, and with the envelope gripped gently in her mouth, she trotted down the walkway and across the neatly trimmed lawn, straight toward Sophie's house. Sophie spotted her through the window and rushed outside. Luna, dignified and determined, placed the envelope at her feet before rubbing against her ankle. Sophie picked up the letter and read it slowly, tears welling in her eyes. Her smile trembled but never broke. She looked toward Mr. Callahan's porch, where he stood watching her with a cup of tea in hand. She raised the letter and he raised his mug in return, a quiet toast to the words that had brought them together. From that day forward, the letters stopped, but the friendship grew. They spent afternoons in the garden, tending to flowers Margaret had once planted. They painted birdhouses, made jam from backyard berries, and let Luna reign supreme as queen of the porch. Luna, content and aging gracefully, kept her post between them, the silent thread that had stitched two lonely hearts into one shared life. And in the stillness of summer nights, sometimes Sophie would swear she could feel Margaret's presence in the rustling of the trees or hear her laughter in the wind chimes, not as a ghost, but as a memory made whole. Years later, when Sophie told the story, at school, to friends, eventually even to strangers, she always ended the same way. I answered a letter that wasn't meant for me, and somehow it saved us both. And always, she would smile when she said the name, Luna.